Hey, Empathy Heroes, it's me, Known Wells. I am the creator and host of You, Me, Empathy. And I hope you're really liking the show. This is the first intro since the launch of the podcast. Just a few days ago, in fact. And the feedback has been overwhelming and very kind and lovely. And it just makes me feel so... It just makes me feel validated, and you guys, I had a lot of nerves and anxiety leading up to the launch of You, Me, Empathy, feeling like, who am I to do this show? Who am I to talk about this? I don't know everything, and just, because I'm realizing now that those are valid feelings, but I don't have to know everything. And who I am a person like you who struggles, who has depression, who has anxiety, who had an eating disorder, who drinks too much, who feels like he's a burden on those around me. So I'm an everyday folk like yourself. That's who I am. Any hoozles, where was I going with that? I guess what I'm saying is, we had the launch of You, Me, Empathy, and the feedback has been so lovely. So thank you. Keep it up. It makes my day every time I see it, whether it's a iTunes review or a comment on Twitter or on Instagram or on Facebook in the community there. It's just the best. You guys are the best. I love you. So today's episode is with my friend Bernadette Peirce, who is just a warm and courageous and compassionate human. And I'm so proud of her for sharing with me and exploring with me the topic of PTSD. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Bernadette was recently diagnosed with PTSD, and she shared and opened up and was very vulnerable. And I love that. She was just so gracious and lovely, and I'm just proud of her. And I'm so happy I know her. And I can't wait for you guys to get to know her a little bit too. So let's do that. Let's do that pretty quickly here. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks for empathizing with us. Real quick here. I always say real quick, and it's never that quick, so apologies for that. But I will say, if you aren't following You, Me, Empathy on Twitter and Instagram, please do. We're at You, Me, Empathy. And go join the Facebook group if you like. A lot of great conversation going on there. Recently, we were talking about some of our recent reads for Friday reads and talking about some of the books that have helped with our mental health. So go do that. We're at facebook.com/groups/You, Me, Empathy. And please go rate and review You, Me, Empathy in Apple Podcasts. If you have iTunes, just go to the store, do a search for You, Me, Empathy, and give us a subscribe and a rate and review. It really helps out the show a lot, and it would mean so much to me if you did that. Thank you. The disclaimer for this show, it's something that needs to be said. The You, Me, Empathy podcast is for informational and or entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. And the last thing I'll say is special thanks to David Grabowski for creating the music for the show and to Grant Snyder for creating the artwork. Both are so inspiring and astounding. So thank you to those guys for doing that. And thank you for listening. Enjoy the show. Welcome to episode 5 of You, Me, Empathy, a podcast about exploring the struggles we face in our day-to-day lives as humans trying to get by on this wondrous and overwhelming pale blue dot. The intent of You, Me, Empathy is to talk openly, without judgment, about our neuroses, our mental illnesses, our shared anxieties and worries, to create a dialogue that is vulnerable and deeply human and empathetic, and to share that dialogue with others to inspire further dialogue and insight so we can, together, break down the stigma that make us feel shame and guilt for struggling, for feeling our feelings, for being human. You, Me, Empathy is a safe place, a conversation between friends, a place to inspire the empathy and beauty in all of us. Today, in episode 5, I am honored to continue this empathy journey on the topic of PTSD with podcaster, film nerd, fierce advocate for mental health awareness, and the world's most passionate Buster Bluth devotee, Bernadette Peirce. Hello, Bernadette.
Hello. I'm busy looking at boys' Linuses. No, that's not true. It's a Buster Bluth comment, just in case anyone thinks that was some strange predatory comment.
No, I know you love Buster Bluth and Arrested Development, so I had to throw that little call back in there. Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for being on You, Me, Empathy.
Thank you for having me. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Oh, good. So before we get into your story a bit, let's just do a check-in. This is sort of how we're feeling this week check-in. How are you feeling this week, Bernadette?
I'm feeling pretty good in comparison to the last few months. So I'm kind of quite cautiously pleased with how I'm going at the moment. And I'm kind of feeling a bit alive for the first time in a while. So that's always a welcomed addition to life. So I have to say it's been a fairly positive week, even though there's been some struggles. I've managed to actually sort of cope with them relatively well for my in my terms anyway. So it's been positive.
Oh, good. That's good to hear. It's so often that it's sort of like a day-to-day call, right? Or a week-to-week call.
Yes, and small victories.
Yes.
What about yourself?
Small victories are important. Myself. So this week has been... So this thing I've been struggling with is feeling basically that my emotions and my sadness and my depression is a burden on those people in my life, like Jessica and friends and things like that. And I've just been thinking about that a lot lately. And I know that emotionally, that is not correct, right? That's a thought that is incorrect because it's not a burden, but because those people love me and they care about me and they want to be there for me. But at the same time, it's like, I guess even I feel so overwhelmed. Like, how can they not feel overwhelmed? Because I don't know. So I've just been feeling that lately. Can you relate to that a bit?
Oh, most certainly. I'm also married. My husband Andrew, and we do a podcast together. There have been times where it's been quite challenging, I'm sure, for him. But I think the burden aspect of it, I think anyone with any sort of illness or a chronic illness perhaps has that feeling of I'm a burden. I think it's maybe a little bit more visceral for people with mental illness because there is that stigma surrounding it in general, and maybe a little bit of a misunderstanding about what exactly it is from ourselves in terms of maybe some shame and guilt or whatever it may be, but then also just in the world in general. So, yeah, I mean, those people who matter in life and who are worth having certainly don't consider people a burden that have an illness like this. There's challenging times, I'm sure,
Yeah.
but that's the same with any relationship, whether it's through illness or just things happening in the world, but or in your little world as a couple or as a family member or friend. But yeah, it's definitely one of the harder things to deal with, I think, and can be quite debilitating to a relationship if that feeling persists and maybe grows. So it's I think it's a good thing to talk about openly when you can, with your partner, or your friends, or whoever it may be.
Yeah. No, that's really good insight. For the listeners, definitely check out episode 1 of You, Me, Empathy. We talked about stigma, what Bernadette is talking about, and self-stigma in particular is one that we talked about a bit, and how that contributes to that burden, that feeling of like, I'm such a burden, like you're on one hand, you're sort of bringing in all the stimuli of like the societal stigma, and
Yes.
just existing, feels almost harsh or combative to someone with mental illness. And then on the other side, you have like that feeding into the stigma that you put on yourself, because you're,
Yes.
you're buying into it, which can be so damaging. So to your point, like talking about it with your partner openly is very important indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. Making sure they have supports as well, I think, is particularly if it is something that, with myself, I've had some hospitalizations this year, so it's been quite severe. So, anytime a partner is in hospital, the other one is going to worry. And so there's definitely that element of it's bringing a challenge to the relationship. But burden is it's almost like this, as if you have some sort of control over it.
Yeah.
If that, like, I can stop being a burden if I just stop being mental.
Right. I know.
And it's not really within, as you say, where if anything, I know with my partner who's, very understanding and has really learnt a lot about mental illness since he's been married to me, as a way to not only connect with myself but help him to manage with, some of the challenges. I can see that even though things are hard sometimes, that he recognizes that I'm trying and that there is this struggle to just live, as you say, and try and function as best as possible. And I think there's a real admiration to that. So it's not, maybe we need to think as people with, lived experience of mental illness, that we're not burdens, that we're actually maybe inspirations to our partners and to people who don't, who are lucky enough maybe not to have mental health issues touch them as pertinently as some of us. But we all, look, 1 in 4 people are going to have a mental illness at some stage.
Yeah.
So you're either going to have it yourself, whether it's chronic or just, a reaction to an event or, a bump in your journey, or you're going to have a loved one who does. So it's far too common for us to be self-stigmatizing and considering ourselves burdens, or to have society stigmatize us.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful way to put it, and to reframe that self-stigma and that, really, self-hatred, self-loathing that we so often, delve into, and to reframe it to think like, hey, Andrew is, in your case, Andrew is gleaning some things about yourself, and he's learning, and he's getting in touch with his sort of emotional side, and he's trying to understand that. And there's something very beautiful about that, and it's what human connection is all about. Like that's where the good stuff is at, and where we find it. So that's beautiful.
Yeah, and I think I don't. I'm not under any delusions that I'm quite lucky to have that in a relationship. Where my heart goes to is people who are dealing with some of the things that I'm dealing with, who don't have a partner, either don't have a partner because they just have met someone, or unable to perhaps, meet someone because of, different issues that they're experiencing, or who haven't found someone who's willing to work on the relationship like my partner has. it must be really hard in those circumstances to kind of to go at it without much support. And I think that's where, as a community, and your podcast is really important to something like this as well, because there are a lot of people out there who do feel really alone and who maybe don't have the supports that you and I have, even if it's just partner-wise. I wish I had more of a, larger circle of friends and family, but I mean, just having a partner that you can talk to openly it makes such a huge difference.
Yeah, that's exactly why this podcast exists, because I feel that, and this is just my experience, but I feel like that, most people don't have that.
Yes.
They maybe have partners, or they maybe have, friends in their lives, but how do I put this? The stigma or the lack of understanding, or just, ignorance, and it's not malicious, but like the people in their lives aren't, one of the things I was talking about in episode 1 about stigma is the people don't have the tools. They don't have the sort of the tools to understand or to seek and to understand the people in their lives who are mentally ill, and so it takes effort. And
yes, it does.
It's not a lack of, I don't think. Again, it's not malicious. It's not. It doesn't mean that they don't love them, but it's reframing love. It's finding a new perspective on like how to really care for and love those in our lives who have mental health struggles.
Yes. And just one, I'm sure you probably want to move on, so I apologize if I'm talking too long, but this is a really interesting, I find this quite fascinating. And one of the areas in my work, I work with within mental health services here in Australia. And I think a lot of people do perhaps, and I'm sure there are some people who genuinely just don't give a shit about people with mental illness, but I'm sure they're few and far between.
Yeah.
But I do think that a lot of people that do personally feel like perhaps their friends and family are maybe being deliberately ignorant or whatever it may be, or malicious in their intent. You've got to, I think there's this tricky situation when it comes with trying to support people who have a mental illness, in that there's a lot of fear about, even if you have maybe, read some books or whatever it may be, you don't necessarily know how to support them well, and you worry about making a mess of it. Mm-hmm. I think there's also a fear factor in terms of there not being actual supports out, particularly in Australia anyway. We have a very poor mental health support system within our health and community. So it's kind of like, okay, I'm here to help you, but in terms of getting maybe professional help, how do I help you navigate that when the system is so challenging? So it's almost like this Bali's thing where it's I don't know how to help, or it's people struggling with that idea that they can't fix you. Do you know, there's nothing they can maybe do actively to bring you joy if you're feeling depressed or whatever it may be. And I think some people find that very challenging, particularly with people they love, this idea to offer support, but it one may not be accepted because perhaps the person is wanting to isolate at that time, or if they do accept it, this idea of trying to get some sort of action, and make some sort of significant change, when in reality it's a really slow process often.
Yeah.
So I think it is quite challenging for a lot of people, and that's why so many people who try and find support feel like it's a real struggle, and those who are trying to support often, it's a struggle for them as well. So it's a very challenging situation, and I think it is really much more complex than a lot of other illnesses. So not to diminish, of course, in any other illness. There's a lot of suffering and terrible things out there. I just mean in terms of some of the complexities around communicating and helping and support, that they're quite unique to mental illness as an experience, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really glad you brought that up, there is a lot of fear, and I think we as humans we like to have control. We like simple explanations of things. We like to, and I think you were speaking to this, we like to check boxes. We like to make tangible, visual sort of progress on things. Like those are things that we like, and those are valid things. But when it comes to mental illness, it is very complex, and it takes a lot more effort. It just does. It takes more learning. It takes more understanding. It takes a lot more patience.
Yes.
I have a younger brother who has schizophrenia, and it's been a long, at times arduous sort of understanding of my initial sort of emotional jerk reaction is to say, I'm going to pour all of myself into you. What can I do? And obviously, I'm coming from a wholehearted place, but I'm not using my brain, because I have to step back and say, hey, I can't fix him. These are things that I can't do. That's not,
no,
that's his journey. That's his brain. And so I've slowly over the years have learned to, be there for him, be present, remind him that I love him. Things like these are great, just relational tools. And, again, I'm just pointing out that even I, struggled with sort of caring for someone with mental illness initially because I wanted to I just wanted to, what can I do? What can I do? Cause that's a natural reaction.
Yeah. And particularly for, a family member and a loved one like that, that is a very natural response. And, with something like schizophrenia, which is, something that is probably on a lifelong journey as well. It's particularly hard for people to support the other, but also, as you say, recognize that they have their own journey and their own agency as well. And you can only give so much. But so much of what you just said there, it also made me think, of the title of this podcast. So much of the small things that help people is just acts of kindness. They don't necessarily have to be this whole idea of, oh, well, I have to do this and this for this person because they're depressed or because they're anxious, or just checking in with someone that you haven't heard from for a while. How are you going? I mean, that means a lot to someone who might be isolated. They may not even respond.
Yeah.
Because maybe they don't know but I know personally when I've really isolated myself and haven't left the house for weeks on end, I do have a particular friend who I'm not even that close to in real life. I mean, I haven't actually seen them for years.
Yeah.
But she seems to have a radar maybe for when I haven't used Facebook maybe for a couple of months or whatever it may be, or even this is just the way she is. She'll just send out a message, how are you going? I haven't heard from you in a while. And that can mean a lot to someone who maybe hasn't, even if it's self-isolated, just someone knowing that someone is thinking of how you're going is quite touching, or it is to me anyway.
No, it is touching. It's lovely, and I want more of it. In the world that I live in. I want this podcast to inspire that in people and to remind people hey, not just the concept of this podcast is for not just people who have mental illness to find some relatability and to empathize and maybe draw some inspiration from it, but also for those who have people in their lives who are mentally ill as well, to find little beautiful tidbits of wisdom like you relayed just then, reminding people that a check-in is it's a very small effort, but it can mean a lot. So that's great. I love that. I love to hear that. Okay, Bernadette.
Yes.
We haven't really introduced you, so why don't you maybe tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and just who you are, what you do, and why you're here.
Okay, well, Bernadette, obviously. I live in Australia, in Perth, Western Australia. So it's a very small city in Australia, very isolated, but lovely. I'm married to Andrew, who's already had a few mentions on this podcast. How I met yourself and your lovely partner Jessica is we do a film review podcast, so we are very film nerdy, and that is how we met at a cinema and online discussing films. So it's kind of the start of our relationship, and it's just continued for the last, we've been married for 9 years. And our podcast is AB Film Reviewed, so we do that, on a semi-regular basis. And, I've got 3 dogs and a cat. I don't have any children, but I do love my fur babies, as people tend to call them. I come from a very I'm Italian background, so I'm quite passionate at times with my vocal modulation and loudness. Sometimes can get. I've worked in mental health I studied psychology at university, and I've kind of worked in mental health or health in general anyway for the last about 12 years. And I've worked in mental health in particular, and drug and alcohol rehabilitation. They're the 2 areas that I've spent most of my work life. Yeah, nothing too exciting, unfortunately.
Sounds pretty exciting to me. I would still love to visit you guys in Perth, Australia sometime.
It is a lovely place. It's quite, compared to Sydney and Melbourne, I guess it could be considered a little bit boring. We don't have a huge nightlife or anything like that, but we do have really beautiful beaches. And in Western Australia, you've got, if you wanted to travel a state in Australia, you've got a lot of variation here in Western Australia, because you've got Perth, which is a little bit of a metropolitan city with beautiful beaches, and down south you've got a lot of greenery and farmland and wineries. And then if you travel up north, you've kind of got desert. So so you've got that variation if you wanted to do a big travel.
Mm-hmm. And
we would love to have you.
Yeah, we will do it someday, because we didn't. We only spent a few hours in Australia, going over to New Zealand this past holiday. But in what capacity do you work in the mental health field?
Prior to, I was a telephone counsellor for a period of time for a drug and alcohol service as part of the government. That was kind of my first foray into substance mental health. Then I'm currently what they call a liaison officer, which is it's a bit of a odd, it's a bit of an odd term. So I cover about 42 mental health services. And basically I assist the clinical staff with things like training on how to engage with consumers and carers in a proactive and positive manner. I help them to do dispute resolution for any complaints or issues that are brought against the service. And then I just do some sort of project and policy type work on safety and quality for those services. So it's a little bit of a I found that the counselling side of things, when I was doing both face-to-face and telephone counselling, with my own struggles, I found it unfortunately became a little bit too raw for me, and perhaps I wasn't being as an effective counsellor as I would like to be because of my own circumstances at the time. So that's why I moved into something that was a little bit more, has a slight sort of corporate side to it, I guess, an education side, and a little bit less face-to-face engagement. But I would like at some point in my life, if I, have a good period of recovery, to maybe look at doing some sort of face-to-face counselling again in the future. But, day to day, as you say.
Yeah, day to day.
It's a day-by-day process.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's great you're working in that field. And I before we move on to the topic, what you had mentioned before, that sort of mental health awareness isn't great in Australia. Can you just speak to just the mental health sort of efforts going on in Australia right now? To,
I
what
think
you
at the
know?
moment, at the moment in WA, there's a lot of work to get people's mental health literacy up. There's a couple of campaigns at the moment. One that's come out called Think Mental Health, which has some resources around, having those conversations with your loved ones if you notice that, they may be struggling. So yeah, it is very much about sort of promotion of conversations that will both destigmatize and also help you to support people to get some sort of support or treatment. The problem is, though, I guess with that, while it's a very valiant and an important thing, we really need to look at our service models. And I think there is a restructure. There's discussions of restructuring. We just don't have enough beds and we don't have enough doctors. And the wait lists and emergency departments, I'm not sure if it's like this in the US, but to present as a public, I'm lucky that I have private health cover. Mm-hmm. So I can, if I needed to see my psychiatrist or go to the hospital, I can. It's a very costly endeavor because, especially when I'm not working, but I've managed to maintain it. But, we have a system where you should, if you present to an emergency department and say that you're suicidal, you shouldn't be turned away. But at this point, it's our resources are so limited, and some staff are so uncaring. Wow. Not all, but some, or just don't necessarily have the skills to deal with situations like that. That I've had some horror stories shared with me in my role, as the liaison officer, of people, being told basically, if they haven't actually done anything, then, kind of go home. Oh, wow. So
that's devastating.
So there's a real, we need to be more planned and preventative rather than waiting for someone to actually, hurt themselves. And I don't know if we're there yet, really, particularly in the public system. You really have to fight to get seen sometimes if it's a busy time or if there's, shortage. And someone who's putting themselves in a vulnerable position to go to, say, an emergency department or their GP or whatever it may be, and saying that, they should be welcomed and embraced and encouraged and celebrated and, be able to get that treatment as soon as possible, not feel like it was all a waste of their time and further sort of causing them trauma and pain. And unfortunately, not all the time, but unfortunately that is what happens because we just aren't putting enough money into actual services. We're focusing a lot more on community rehabilitation, which is good for some, but not for all.
Yeah.
Particularly those with, illnesses like schizophrenia or paranoid schizophrenia or, who have mental illnesses and intellectual disabilities or some other co-occurring issue that will make treatment in, say, an community facility a lot more stressful for them and perhaps not meet their needs. So yeah, I think there's a lot of reform that's needed, and yeah, particularly in the youth field as well. I think there's, if you're in your sort of early 20s, it's quite hard to, because you're not necessarily part of the youth services anymore. But you're also perhaps a little bit too young to be in certain inpatient hospitals. Because you're going to find that a lot of the patients are much older than yourself. And that can be quite challenging to promote a recovery-focused care plan if you're 20 and everyone around you is like 40 or 50 or, especially if you're doing things like group therapy and stuff, it can be quite a challenge for that individual.
Yeah, isolating probably.
Mm.
Yeah, that's tough to hear, and I don't know, my knowledge of what it's like in the U.S. is limited, but I've heard some similar stories. I think I'm not comparing, but I just think across the board, I was just curious, and I think across the board, we're both saying that we need to do better.
We do, because we're talking about, I think there's this, people aren't understanding that it's actually people's lives. It's not just they might die, because they might, which, is hard for some people to understand. But we're also just talking about it's for the better of our society as a whole, because if you can be more preventative and planned and have more open access to services when people need it, you need to sort of capture that, because that motivation to get help can go away really quickly. Or symptoms can increase to the point where it's hard to engage with someone therapeutically. So if we don't have that, then we're missing out on giving someone a better life, and maybe someone who's going to contribute, something beautiful to the world and wants to live a full life. They may have years of suffering ahead just because, we're trying to save pennies. I mean, I'm not naive. I know that, things are costly and there's obviously budgets and things like that. But I don't know. It's something that's so important, mental health and general health services. But I don't know. It just feels like sometimes we spend a lot of money on things that don't have a very good patient outcome at the end, or we spend a lot of money on, things that look good from the outside, perhaps, or like we're doing things, but what do they actually provide to these people in need in the long run? And are we consulting with people who are actually have this illness and people who care for them and their family members on what works? Because I think a lot of the time we aren't, and we're very rigid and stick to that medical model, which, I'm on a lot of medication. I was very anti-medication for a period of time, but, I've come to realize that, no, I'm probably going to have to be on medication perhaps for the rest of my life, and that's fine. I've accepted that. But, there are a lot of other things that would be great to be able to try, but because we can't research them, or they're not funded by, Fexor or Prozac or whatever it may be, they don't necessarily have this research evidentiary backing that is needed for a government, say, to put money into it or to bring it into a hospital, like light therapy and, all this other sort of alternative things that, I'm not saying they'd work for everyone, or that means you might be able to stop using certain medications. But, hey, when I'm at my lowest, I'll be willing to try anything.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's just about creating a space, a safe space for people. Like, there's nothing more damaging to that person who is struggling to be met with a block like that, where they feel like they are, to use your words, they're embracing vulnerability. They're saying, I need some help here. And that step alone is very challenging and difficult. And so if we as humans have more understanding and capacity for understanding, hey, this person is struggling, just by the simple fact that they're coming to us and expressing that, to turn them away, irreparable damage, I would say.
Oh, yes.
Sure. And again, we don't have all the answers here. We're not mental health professionals, but we have our experiences, and I think medically there's a long way to go. It's very complex, obviously, but 1 in 4, like you said, that's significant.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's not. If it was 1 in 4 with a lot of other illnesses, I think there would be a real push to make things easier for people to access services and to have alternative treatments be readily available for those that want to access them.
Yeah.
But it's hard when you've got what they call an invisible illness, essentially, like with that in the sense of I can't come to you and show you my pain physically, right, in a sense, or maybe show you some of my symptoms, and you're possibly not going to be able to tell me when it's going to get better or when it's going to get worse and when it's going to return or when it's going to go away. So we're dealing with if you look at it sort of in a philosophical psychology sort of sense, it really is at the heart of us as an individual and our identity at times. And it's, as you say, when you put yourself out there vulnerably and say to someone that I need help, particularly in, like, say, an emergency department setting, and if that isn't handled with real care and understanding, it just, as I say, some of the experiences that I've heard, are quite, I feel that empathy and sympathy and anger, and frustration is, very real.
Yeah. I have another tangent that I want to go on because it made me think of it, but we will get to PTSD, I promise. But I just wanted to say this thing. It just sort of came to me. I don't know what the percentage is. It's definitely dropping, but there's still a vast majority of human beings believe in a higher power of some kind. I personally don't. I respect the choices of people who do. That's fine. But if we can maybe reframe the perspective of mental health to think like, hey, yes, it's an invisible illness, like God. Right? I mean, I'm being like a little cheeky, but you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, there is faith and power in God and a higher power for many,
Yes.
If we can maybe take a little bit of that sort of structure of thinking into mental illness and say, hey, it's invisible. We can't see it, but it's still there. It's very powerful. It's very part of who we are.
Yes. And just like religion, it can have a huge impact on people.
Exactly.
In their experience, you can't, as you say, I was raised Catholic, and I'm not practicing or anything at the moment. I don't really know what I believe. I just go day by day into the world. But you can't necessarily point to God on a blood test or on an X-ray, just like you can't necessarily point to depression or point to PTSD on a blood test. But yes, I think that's a very interesting way to look at it for those that maybe struggle with this idea that it's just people being, I hate to use the word, but some people do consider it people being maybe weak, or people being unable to cope, or not wanting to cope, or wanting to sort of take easy way outs. And if anyone ever spent a day with any sort of mental illness, whether it be anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, personality disorders, whatever, you would never say that. You would never say, because you would understand just how challenging and difficult things like just getting up or engaging with another person is. So it really is, I guess, for those that maybe have that mindset and who may be people of faith, that would be a really interesting way to maybe get them to understand. I like it.
Yeah, it's just a thought. I mean, I could think of maybe a couple people in my direct family who that would benefit. So let's transition and talk about the topic of today, which is PTSD. Before we get into the sort of our experiences with PTSD, I wanted to just read off a little definition and maybe a quote about trauma. So this is from the National Institutes of Health. It says the definition, quote, PTSD is a disorder that develops in some people who have experienced a shocking, scary, or dangerous event. Nearly everyone will experience a range of reactions after trauma, yet most people recover from initial symptoms naturally. Those who continue to experience problems may be diagnosed with PTSD. People who have PTSD may feel stressed or frightened even when they are not in danger. End quote. So that's a basic definition. I wanted to read this one quote real quick that I found particularly poignant. It's from what's his name? Excuse me. His name is Bessel van der Kolk. And
yes, yeah.
You know him?
It sounds familiar. I think I might have a book by this individual.
Yeah, he's done a lot of work on trauma and...
Yes. Is it The Body Keeps Score?
Possibly. He works in body awareness and EMDR.
I got it right here.
Oh, there we go. Nice. Yeah, that's
I'm
him.
reading it right now.
Perfect. What sweet serendipity that is.
Yes.
So he says this thing about trauma, which I particularly liked. He says, quote, "Trauma is much more than a story about the past that explains why people are frightened, angry, or out of control. Trauma is re-experienced in the present, not as a story, but as profoundly disturbing physical sensations and emotions that may not be consciously associated with memories of past trauma. Terror, rage, and helplessness are manifested as bodily reactions like a pounding heart, nausea, gut-wrenching sensations, and characteristic body movements that signify collapse, rigidity, or rage," end quote. I just thought that was a beautiful sort of encapsulation of trauma and the reaction to trauma.
Yes.
I liked.
Their body keeps score. The book that I just showed, Non, that I'm reading, which that individual wrote, goes a lot into in depth about that and looks at certain case studies of his during his practice, ranging from, people who have been in, war like the Vietnam War, and then people who have had, prolonged sexual abuse or, childhood neglect and things like that. So it's a really fascinating book if you're interested in learning a bit more about the impact of trauma, not only on the mind but on the physical body.
Great. Yeah, no, I'll definitely link that in the show notes. So, Bernadette, do you want to share your experience with PTSD?
Yeah, I mean, and forgive me if I sort of say anything strange. This is something that I haven't really spoken much about before. I've always, from a very early age, I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety from childhood. And so I kind of always knew that I was struggling with certain things, but I guess I didn't really necessarily have context for them, or the anxiety side of it wasn't as pronounced as it has become. And it wasn't until probably about 3 or 4 years ago that I started to experience these symptoms that just seemed out of place for what I normally had become used to. There was a lot of hypervigilance, to the point of making myself quite exhausted because I was so on edge for no particular reason. And a lot of nightmares and flashbacks, but more sort of emotional than visual, although I did have some visual ones as well. And they were very vague. They were sort of just around violence and things like that. And I found it all quite bizarre and kind of overwhelming and a bit frightening. And so I kind of didn't raise it with anyone at the time. I just kept, pushing through, because I'm kind of one of those individuals who, having been diagnosed at a young age and having symptoms from a young age, and coming from, like most people, a very, dysfunctional family.
Plus, you're Italian.
And Italian, yes. I just kept pushing through and thinking, well, once I reach this part of my life or achieve this, then I'll feel better. All of these symptoms are just, a manifestation of me not achieving enough, or not having a partner, or not having the job I want, or not being thin enough, or not doing pretty enough. And so if I lose weight, then I'll feel happier. If I start learning to put makeup on, I'll feel better. All these different things where I thought if I sort of kept moving that goal outward, that eventually once I reached it, then things would get better. But it wasn't. I found that that physical symptoms of anxiety and hypervigilance and nightmares and terrors that come with PTSD, and particularly in this case, what's interesting about PTSD is I think there's so much research initially has been done due to the experience of war veterans and veterans of or people who have experienced horrific events that might be just a one-off or for a period of time, and then have to return to life and adjust. And what sort of, I guess, is a bit different for myself and some people who are just now starting to learn a bit more about PTSD is that some people refer to it as complex PTSD, which it hasn't. There's no no DSM diagnoses or anything like that that relates to this at this stage. It is just PTSD. But for those, I guess, who haven't necessarily experienced one thing that they could say, I had a really horrific car accident, or I was in a war, or when it's prolonged trauma in childhood, particularly during those key developmental stages, where, and particularly if the person that is who's causing the trauma is a caregiver or someone that you should feel safe with. I think that sort of more developmental trauma is quite challenging, one, to label as PTSD to begin with, because we do associate it so much with something outward that happens, which, everyone understands as horrific, or things that when it's something that you perhaps have never shared with anyone, like, say, in my instance, I had a mother who had PTSD. She was sexually assaulted and beaten to almost death at one stage in her young adult life. And then she met my father, who was also violent and an alcoholic, and had me. But she was sort of living with PTSD and living with an abuser and also trying to raise a child. So just from birth, my anxiety level was, at
you're
peak.
in a very
because
emotionally...
Yes. And then, of course, you've got the fear of, a violent environment that's very hostile between, the ages of, birth to 6 years old. You kind of, you develop that fear response and that anxiety response to the point where I disassociated from most of my childhood. Mm-hmm. I did, I still don't really remember anything prior, or I remember certain things, but I have no sort of identity or memory of anything prior, probably to the age of about 11 or 12. Yeah. And, it's only when these PTSD symptoms became prevalent, the nightmares and the hypervigilance and the avoidance of a lot of things, even just life in general, but avoidance of certain people and of crowds and anywhere where I felt fear or anxiety. It wasn't until that happened in around 2013, 14 that I realised that, the impact that that sort of childhood abuse and having a parent that had PTSD, the effect that had, on me developing, and, as you say, my sense of identity and self-worth, but also just my ability to manage and cope with situations of stress and emotionally regulate and self-soothe, which I really struggle with. Yeah. And so that's kind of where I'm at the moment. It's kind of it's a bit of even though it has been a few years now, it's still this learning curve, because I felt like I had dealt with most of the stuff from, like many people, the very challenging and traumatic things that happened in my childhood and sort of the way that I was raised. And, the dependent relationship I had with my mother, because there's a lot of guilt when you are born of a marriage that's violent. Mm-hmm. And being Catholic and Italian, my mum had very little choice but to have me. Yeah. Of course, she adores me, and I'm like her life. She would never think that was, a bad thing that happened in her life.
And she's still around?
Yes, she is. Yeah, she's 63. And she's doing doing not too bad, actually, I have to say. But that trauma of, or the shame or the guilt that you feel that your sort of your existence in the world brought pain to someone who was already suffering, but then you also brought joy, and obviously we are close, and that sort of that codependent relationship that we then had once she eventually was able to leave my father, and it was just her and I, and you become that parent to some, obviously she was a wonderful mother. I'm very lucky to have her, and she's very loving, but she was someone who was really struggling with her own, sexual, obviously, in this time at the moment, with all the sexual harassment and sexual abuse and assault and that is coming out. You have to think back to when it happened to her. She wasn't allowed to say anything about it.
Yeah.
And she never received any sort of form of justice or any form of support. And, the same thing happened when she was with my father. It was a sort of you have to keep it secret because it's shame to the family.
Yep.
And, you've made a commitment under God to be married, and you have to fulfill that commitment. So, things might not have changed all that much, but I feel like there is a little bit of hope because, personally, obviously, there was a lot of issues and things that I'm trying to get better at managing and building my self-worth and emotional regulation and ability to manage anxiety and some of those, more physical symptoms. But, it's also about, I guess, letting go of any of that fear, or trying to let go of feelings of sort of guilt and shame around, the life that my mother led, which I don't have too much control over. Yeah. But there is that element of I wasn't able to help her enough, or, she still, lives alone and things like that. And so it's almost like you say with your brother, I almost want to give my life over to her to make whatever years she has left better. But she really wants me to live and to be well.
Yeah.
That's God, I've rambled on now.
No, it's
but that's, I guess, it's hard to describe, when I'm still struggling, I'm still kind of trying to get my and having that sort of amnesia aspect to it, where I can't necessarily remember specific things about, there's elements of, sexual abuse that relate to myself as well, that, I can never, I don't know if I'll ever 100% know exactly what happened, or if it did happen. I've been told by a lot of people that, if you have, not to go into too much detail, but if you have these types of feelings and symptoms and things like that, then, it's hard to imagine things having not occurred. But, there's that element of uncertainty and even self-stigma, as you say, where you kind of think, oh, am I making all of this up? Am I making it worse than, am I sort of giving myself an out or an excuse? Am I sort of, adding padding to things or whatever it may be? And you just think, well, that doesn't really make sense, does it? Like, why would you want to do that? So I kind of try and remember that whatever really happened, and I may never know certain things, what matters is how I'm feeling and the symptoms that I'm going through, and how to manage those better, to have a life that was, to embrace the difficulties that I had, and that they've made me a person that maybe has some empathy and wants to work in, areas that, provide assistance to people who are also suffering. That's a good thing, so trying to perhaps look at the positives that have come out of having experienced certain things, and now just working on getting my life back and actually living, rather than, living in fear all the time, because for the last few years it feels like it's just been nothing but fear and avoidance.
Yeah.
And, literally 2 weeks ago, when I started to feel a bit normal and alive again, it was both a beautiful experience where I just, like a light had been flicked, and all of a sudden I had this connection to myself that I hadn't had for a while, and was able to kind of genuinely enjoy things, and, was able to sleep properly, for the first time in a couple of years. It's just it's remarkable, and you enjoy that, but then you also start to fear that it will go away.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of in this limbo of, oh God, I do have to live it one day at a time, and just,
day by day.
But it's hard, when you have this fear of, what will I do if it goes again?
Yeah.
Will I be able to cope? Yeah.
But you have that understanding. You you know what it feels like now, right? You know what that clarity and that good sort of positive feeling feels like, and you have a bit of clarity in terms of the retrospect, looking back on and how you got to where you are, right? And so that has to account for some things, right?
Yeah, it does. It's funny though, because a friend of mine who, he's also, has some issues with anxiety and depression and a few other things at the moment. And sometimes we joke that we'd actually rather not have the awareness. We're like, oh, wouldn't it be easier if like we just, didn't have like this grasp of an understanding of, well, maybe if I did this and this and this, things would, and not be able to do it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's kind of, yes, you're right. Of course, it is 100% better to have that awareness, but it's also sometimes it can sort of be this double-edged sword in a sense where you just think, oh God, well then why can't I just get there? Again, like you say, rushing to trying to get to that place and not necessarily being able to live in that moment and to live with something that I struggle with, which is I do believe related to PTSD and certain personality aspects of myself that have developed because of childhood trauma, is that inability to how do you put it? I did some DBT work with dialectical behavioral therapy. I don't know if you've ever done
I've
that.
heard of it.
Yeah. I didn't do the full course because it's quite intensive, but I did sort of like a primer course, which was 5 days. And it was interesting, like to compare it to CBT, to cognitive behavioral therapy. But it was sitting with discomfort and, unpleasantness and confronting that. And it's so, for myself personally, and maybe some people who are listening to this as well, I find that very hard. My first reaction is to avoid it at all costs.
Yeah.
Even if it means not going to work or
run away, drink,
even
whatever.
Drink. Well, yes, that's another. That's the ultimate fix for that for me anyway. Which is something that I really have to be mindful of, because in the last few years my drinking has skyrocketed. To the point where when I was hospitalized, they thought that I might have withdrawal. And I was like, no, I won't, I don't drink that much, but it was fun. I didn't. I was lucky. I didn't have any withdrawal symptoms, but they were breathalyzing me and making me do charts and things. And I'm thinking, geez, I didn't realize that my drinking had reached this point where professionals were, concerned. But it's just such an easy fix to take away that it doesn't make me feel good in particular, a little bit sometimes if I get that right, the right balance, but it just things feel quiet.
Sure.
And peaceful for a mere hour or two, maybe.
Well, and especially someone like yourself who has the hypervigilance, who has the is very I guess the hypervigilance and that active mind, like it I mean, I know that for me, I definitely drink too much. I'd like to drink less, but for me, alcohol helps that sheen of calm a little bit.
And if I do have to face discomfort, like going to an event that I'm nervous about, or spending time with, people who I don't particularly maybe get along with all that well, or have a bit of a fractured relationship with, it's like, oh, better pre-game, better have a couple of drinks before. Because that'll help. And what's dangerous about that, in some ways, while it's immediately effective, is that if you do succeed, or succeed in the terms of you go to that event and maybe you are actually, you're able to chat to some people and you have a good time, or, maybe you're honest with some people and, maybe resolve some conflict, you're never going to attribute that to yourself.
No.
You will always attribute it to the alcohol or to, if you've popped a Valium or whatever it may be.
You're building the wrong case.
Yeah. So instead of being able to self-soothe yourself and sit with that discomfort, yeah, you're using these other, which is not, as I say, I do it all the time. I'm certainly not saying that you do what works, but I guess in the long run, it would be great if I was able to do that, to do it and be able to attribute the success to myself, not to, a couple of vodkas.
We'll get there. We
Mm,
will. So I want to
yes.
go back to first. I just want to say thank you for sharing that. I'd imagine that's very difficult to share, and I know that PTSD diagnosis is, fairly new. So I just wanted to thank you for sharing that. I empathize with the childhood trauma aspect of your story. I definitely experienced some of that, and my reaction and sort of the coping mechanism, which I know you can relate to, was to bottle it up, to hide, to make myself quiet, and then
Yeah.
when I got old enough to emotionally put myself into a position as mediator for my parents. And so I guess bringing that up to ask you, like, I know for me, like that did some damage. It definitely did some damage, but I learned a lot of, I think, sort of negative emotional techniques, coping techniques. What did you, as you were, let's just talk about your mom. Like, as you were sort of in that relationship with your mom, like, what kinds of things are you learning? What kinds of things are you picking up? Like, what kinds of things are you taking on as a wee lass?
I think for me it was that it was my job to make people feel better.
Yeah.
And it was my job to be everyone's counselor in a sense. Particularly with my mum, it was I never felt like I could ever just be a young child, a teenager, because everything, if I ever did anything wrong or, rebellious or whatever, I couldn't bear to bring her more pain.
Oh, that just
Do
breaks my
you know what I
heart.
mean? Like she's someone who, is a beautiful woman who's had, sorry, now I'm getting a bit emotional.
No, it's okay.
No, who's had, a lot of um terrible things happen in her life over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And I guess the idea that in any way, if I was to make her unhappy, even just being naughty or whatever, if I was to contribute to that, I couldn't live with myself. So I guess, you just don't act like you don't have the freedom that other children have. And so it becomes quite hard, I think, also, as you say, you bottle things up and, I'm not saying I was perfect. I'm sure there were times when I did eventually lash out, and that's even worse because I still do that now with her. Is that I don't ever say if she does anything that upsets me, or I'll keep it all inside. But then eventually, it's like release the Kraken in Clash of the
That's the danger
Titans.
of it. Yeah.
And I will just explode at her to the point where I'm bringing her to tears.
Yeah.
One, because I'm actually, getting upset, and two, because she's probably, very rarely seen me like that in my And then, of course, and then I just feel terrible for days because I just think, oh my God, I can't believe and the same sort of thing happened, as I was growing up, probably to a lesser extent because I really, felt like I couldn't do it at all. And so just continued to bottle, everything up. Like, I was bullied like you wouldn't believe in high school, like a lot of people were. And probably because I was an easy target. I was quiet. I was kind of a bit odd, quite isolating. I went to a Catholic school that was everyone else had kind of gone through the system together, like you call it like elementary school and all that. Whereas I was coming because I had like a scholarship.
Okay.
So everyone knew each other, and they paid because my mum and I were on, she hasn't been able to work her whole life pretty much since the incidents with my dad, and that sort of re-triggered, trauma from her past. She's had, her anxiety and depression has been so severe that she hasn't been able to support herself, so she's on a disability pension. And yeah, so she, the bullying and all of that, which was, pretty horrific at the time for, it's awful to go to school and be in fear, that you're going to be, and then to not be able to come home and tell your parent what's happening. I never really thought about that until I was older. Like, I just thought, oh, wow, like I didn't actually have anyone that I could speak to about that. And that's why I stopped going to school. I would always be sick, or I'd have illnesses, or, making stuff up. Oh, I've got a fever. Oh, this, And, it wasn't until I realized that I can't keep doing that, because otherwise I'm not going to get an education.
Right.
And you kind of just, toughed it out for the last 3 years. But, so I guess, just that freedom. And I don't know if you felt this way. It's a terrible thing to think, because I try and be a positive person. But I guess when you're younger in particular, and I had a small group of friends, and particularly sort of around like 15, 16, I developed like a small group of girlfriends at school. So I got it easier. Mm-hmm. We were kind of, a little outcast group, or whatever you want to call it. But when I'd spend time with them, and I'm not saying their lives are perfect at all, I'm sure there are many things that, I wasn't aware of and stuff, but I found it really difficult just spending time at their house, because it was so foreign to me. Things like, having dinner as a family, or, having a brother, who you could chat, have like this sort of mocking relationship with, have parents that were, together, that worked, that had, you had a bit of a disposable income, you went on holidays. It was just all, and there was a sense of anger about it, which I think still manifests in me sometimes, where you start to compare yourself all the time with other people.
Absolutely.
So it's valid. Like that sort of anger or grief, I guess, maybe at, in you especially if you're depressed, I think you kind of feed off that, and it rises above again. You have to let things like that go, because, at some point, or, you can have your moment of feeling sad about it, but, if you let it overtake you, which it has in the past with me sometimes, I find myself so angry all the time, and, just really isolating myself from other people, when in reality I don't know what their lives are like, just because someone's putting holiday snaps up on Facebook or something doesn't necessarily, and I, can't afford to go on a holiday because all my treatment's costing me so much, or I haven't worked for 6 months. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily happy,
Speaking of angry, the other day, I was giggling with Jessica about this, because it was silly, understandable, but silly. I don't know. We were talking, and I was just feeling like I wasn't being understood, and I was feeling just frustrated. And I have moments where I just feel frustrated. I feel angry. I feel like I just want to listen to punk rock and say fuck you to everyone. I have like that anarchic side to me, and I think that stems from my like the sort of weird oppressive structure that I was raised in. And so I went into the bedroom, and I just like viciously punched our pillows on the bed. And it helped. And I went back and told Jessica, and we were giggling about it, because it was an emotional outburst. It was a valid one, and made sense for me at the time. And talking about is led to some laughter. What I want to ask you, Bernadette, is, so you had this childhood where you felt as though you couldn't be yourself. That was your coping mechanism. That was an understandable reaction to your situation. And then you get into high school where you feel fear, and I presume you're also feeling like you're putting up a wall a little bit, and not feeling like you can be your true self. Was there a point, at what point were you able to sort of come into your own a little bit and be a bit more of yourself?
I think as I got older, probably, like university helped because you have more freedom there.
Anonymity a little bit.
Yeah, and I'd reached that age where my mum kind of had to let me have more freedom as well because, I was 18, 19,
Sure.
and I was going to university where it was a little bit further away. I still lived at home. So, there was some growth, I think, there. But probably not until I moved out and lived on my own for a short period of time. That was a really big, that was a really difficult step for me to take, to leave my mum's house.
Yeah.
But it kind of had to happen because otherwise I think we would have a relationship now that is either, I don't know what would have happened.
Grey
but
Gardens.
Exactly, yeah. Or I would just be so unwell. I don't know if I'd be functioning at all. So that, as challenging as it was, that definitely gave me some freedom and opened me up to I guess maybe trying to understand myself. I don't know if I'm there yet, but it definitely gave me that freedom and sitting with that uncomfortableness of my mum being quite devastated that I was choosing not to live with her anymore, even though I was 22. I wasn't young.
Yeah,
I wasn't like leaving. I was quite. Most people begin.
You're not
to,
like 10-year-old with a rucksack on your
leave
back.
the nest. Yeah. And I still lived pretty close to her, so it wasn't like a very big distance. She could easily come and see me, and she did. But that I think, and meeting Andrew, who I had not really ever had a normal relationship prior to that. I didn't really. I'd had sort of one other I don't know what you would call it, something. It was a something.
It was a something.
But it was certainly not improving my self-worth, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So to find someone who I shared common interests with and who seemed to like me for some reason was quite shocking at first. And I guess eventually, as we navigated our relationship, it wasn't easy. I think in the first couple of years, that gave me a bit of feelings of connectedness and self-worth. But I still really don't, there's this big part of me that feels like I just don't really have an identity. It's bizarre. Like I know a lot of people feel that way, and
I think that's
maybe it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's common, and I think it is a good thing because it speaks to a continuing growth, right? We're always growing, we're always learning and discovering, new things about ourselves, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. I like to be open. I know what my values are. Like I know what means a lot to me.
Yeah.
And I want to try and surround myself with people who have similar values, or what similar things that are maybe important or they're passionate about. But I'd like to be open. That being said, I would like, identity and self-worth are very closely linked, I think. And perhaps I think some of that uncertainty that I feel really is just that feeling of, self-worth that is probably lower than it should be. Mm-hmm. And I just need to begin to grow that. But it's hard. Like it's because it's different to self-esteem, because self-esteem can kind of maybe come from others at times as well. Like they can boost your self-esteem or boost, but self-worth really has to come from you, like you have to grow it like a plant.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do if you're not if it's not something that's sort of at least, you've had maybe a little bit of a seed sprout as you've grown. So
Yeah.
do you know what I mean?
I do. It is hard.
My garden's a bit bare, and I'm trying now maybe to start, putting some water into it, and it's just not taking the way that I'd like.
Well, I still struggle with that mightily. I feel like I don't deserve any love whatsoever. I feel that pretty regularly. That's a sort of ongoing feeling of mine. So that's a thing that I struggle with. But it makes sense, like you're experiencing that now, because for so long you weren't yourself. You didn't have your identity. You had what I called my heart guard. You had this wall up, and you weren't experiencing yourself. You weren't experiencing your true self. So how could you? Of course, like when you go off on your own at 18 or 22, you're going to feel like, oh, I'm feeling the things. I'm feeling my emotions. And like that is super difficult, especially after, almost a couple of decades of not experiencing that, And so I guess, I bring that up to say, like, yes, it's totally understandable that you're struggling with that. I struggle with that all the time.
Yes, and I think the world can be how to put it, can be quite cruel to people who have those feelings of low. I feel like the world, I don't know, that maybe it's just me, but
no, it's not just you. It's not just you.
Everyone's so competitive and like, self-motivated. And I just like, I don't know, I work in an environment with a lot of very confident people. Maybe they don't have a lot of self-worth, but they're able to at least project it.
They're good at projecting, yeah.
And I everything is a second guess. And, it's a constant, particularly if I'm feeling low on that particular day, as you say, I just, constantly I think, why am I even breathing air? Like I'm a waste of space.
Yeah.
Like that is, or I'm a garbage person. That's I used to say that I would say that to my psychologist, my last psychologist. He'd be like, how do you feel? And I just go, I'm just a garbage. I'm a garbage person. And he'd say, please tell me more. And I'd be like, there's nothing more to tell. I just, and it's hard to, it's really hard to work on. I'm seeing a female now, just because I thought, I don't know, there were some issues that I found maybe a little. I've always had male psychologists. I don't know why. Probably they're a bit more prevalent in my area. And I just thought that it might be good, particularly in the last, couple of years with the, certain sexual things, that it might be easier to maybe talk to a female.
Yeah.
So this is sort of my first experience long term with a female psychologist, and that's something that we're apparently working on next is building self-worth. So I'm interested to see what tools she and suggestions she has, because it's been a lifelong journey. I mean, people say, oh, but if you could see yourself through, a friend's eyes or through your partner's eyes, then that would, try and change your perception. Mm-hmm. But it is hard when it's just so ingrained and those neural pathways of doubt and worry and rumination on negatives or on things that you find, wrong with yourself or things that you'd like to change or whatever it may be. Oh, they're very debilitating at times.
Yeah, those neural pathways are challenging. Yep.
That's what I just there must be. There must be like a shortcut in my brain that, because I'm aware of it and I try and do the thought stopping or whatever, other technique there is. And sometimes it works. But again, it's almost so overwhelming, the habitualness of these certain thoughts and worries. And it is really hard, and you've got to just keep working at it, I guess, to make a difference, but it can be hard.
What do you worry about? What are some common worries for you?
I think I just worry about God, everything. Like, if there's something to worry about, I will worry about it. I guess I worry about, am I not, at the moment I'm worrying about my job. I'm
Mm-hmm.
working only part-time at the moment, and I really worry that I can't do it, that I'm going to not be able to turn up to work each day. It's Sunday today at the moment here. And so it's work tomorrow, and I've been worrying since I woke up. So instead of enjoying my Sunday, I'm probably going to spend the next 8 hours in like a constant state of worry about, what will tomorrow bring, and will I be able to actually do the things that I need to do, or am I just going to collapse in a ball of tears, or have a panic attack, or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
And then, just the other general worries about my mum, obviously she's living alone at the moment. So constantly worried about what's going on with her, worried about Andrew. Is he going to leave me? Is he going to stay? Is he happy? Or is he just saying that because he's a nice guy, Am I going to like the new Star Wars movie? Like,
Now we're getting real.
I'm seeing it this afternoon. So I was like, will I enjoy it or will I not? Let it know.
Those are all valid worries, especially the Star Wars one.
Yeah.
Have
you seen it?
No, I haven't seen it.
No,
We're seeing it tomorrow, which is our Sunday. So we'll see it shortly after you see it. It's interesting that you said that, and I totally relate to this. We understand intellectually the worries that we have won't amount to anything. We understand that what we're worrying about is out of our control, or, the worry is not going to impact it in any way. And yet we worry. What's that about?
It's a good question.
It's confounding and flummoxing.
I think the way that for me, I guess the way that I think about it is the worry has become my coping mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't worry about all of these things, something bad might happen.
Yeah.
Or I won't be prepared if something bad does happen. It's almost like a compulsion, or an inability to control that impulse. And what do I get out of it? Well, maybe I get this idea that I'm prepared, or that I'm thinking of every possible scenario, or I'm avoiding living in the moment and actually living life. And so, it's...
Do you ever try to unpack it after the fact? Like, let's say you worry about a particular thing happening and that thing doesn't happen. Do you ever sort of think about it after the fact and think, oh,
yeah, I think why the F did I spend 2 hours, working myself up into tears sometimes, or into a, sweaty frenzy or something about something that worked out just fine. But then if it worked out just fine, do I attribute it to the worry? To the fact that I worried about it? Like, well, if I hadn't worried about it,
it would have been a disaster.
Whatever. Then I would have been, what's the word? I would have been like smited or something for daring not to worry about something and being, cavalier about it. Oh, God. I mean, it's just and I mean, it's something that everyone can understand, because everyone worries to varying degrees.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, for those that maybe don't have it at a, maybe a neurotic or a pathological level, or a symptom of, some real anxiety issues or other issues, think about the day, your worst day of worry, and imagine that almost 24/7. So it really is quite debilitating and exhausting. I mean, I find I'm particularly as at the moment with the PTSD stuff, I'm exhausted all the time.
Yeah.
Either from, the symptoms or a lack of sleep or disrupted sleep or nightmares or whatever it may be, or my medication sometimes makes me feel tired in the morning. And then when you add on all this extra mental activity of worry, no wonder I've struggled to just do, a couple of days at my job. And, my job is quite complex at times. And so I'm not really doing myself any favors by, using my time and energy on a day off or at, when I'm actually at my job to worry about things that haven't actually happened yet.
Yeah.
But again, maybe it is about some of that self-worth as well. Maybe I wouldn't worry so much about things like my ability to perform if I had, base level of self-worth, where I could say, well, I haven't had too many issues in the past. And if I do struggle, well, everyone struggles at times.
And you're a
some
capable, powerful, woman.
Yeah, and the whole thing of the only person I have to be good enough for is myself. But that doesn't feel that way. It feels like I need to be good enough for everyone else on some weird standard that I don't know who prescribed or
No, society prescribed.
Yeah, and
it
it's
seems
just
that way sometimes.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the worry with your therapist?
We have talked about it, yeah, and it's I just they she's very insightful and she's given me different tools that I can use, like having specific, like writing my worries down and then, engaging in sort of that thought stopping behavior or giving myself a specific worry time every day. Like this is the between this time and this time, I'm going to allow to worry as much as I want.
That's adorable.
But the funny thing is, and I'm sure a lot of people who have been in therapy and, other things for a long period of time, like you know that these things can actually work and that they have worked for other people. But when someone tells you them, I can't help but roll my eyes sometimes. Like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll just write all my worries down. Oh, yeah, okay. Between 5 and 6 p.m. will be my worry time. And so again, a part of me wonders, is that just, me trying to not necessarily make changes, you kind of, and some of them do sound a bit silly, I guess, for when you're not necessarily doing them, you just hear about it.
Well, they sound so simple, right? Because I've been in therapy and I've heard those things, and they do sound simple on the surface, but I have to sort of shed that a little bit and say, hey, like my therapist is someone I trust, someone who's a professional and has the degrees, and all that stuff. So, I don't know if it's, just this skepticism or just, it's the self-worth getting, sort of screwing it up. But yeah, like that's tough. It is tough sometimes to take some of those steps.
And some of those like doing those things and activities to try and sort of manage symptoms like that, like something that is as prevalent as, worry and rumination. I think as soon as life gets more challenging, or my stress tolerance, decreases because, I've got a really busy week at work, they're the first things to go.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like, forget it. Let me just have a bottle of wine and, I'll be.
Yeah, what is this frivolous writing in my journal shit? Yeah.
What is this worry time? What is it?
I don't have time for this. I'm an adult human being. I have responsibilities. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, I guess, again, because you're not necessarily doing them consistently, and it becomes even harder to start again.
Yeah.
But I guess it's that, like a lot of illnesses and struggles, things like, say, substance abuse. you have to keep doing
Yep.
these things that that will sort of keep you in a state where you can maintain your recovery. If you don't do these practices on a daily basis, then that's when, things start to unravel or can unravel.
Are there things that you have learned that have maybe helped you personally sort of cope with your worry, your PTSD, your self-worth? Are there little things that you've picked up and do help you?
I think at this stage it's still quite early. What I
Yeah.
have found that helps is doing some reading, like I have been with the Body Keeps Score, and reading other people's accounts of how certain traumas or certain events in their life have impacted them, because I think we become quite insular, and again with that stigma, we feel like, oh, surely this is just me it's something to do with me specifically. Like
Yeah.
it's not a real,
Yeah.
reaction. Like
Yeah.
it's not a reaction that other people would have. I'm just this way, or
Yeah.
I'm poor
You're all
Groper.
alone. That's the feeling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's exactly. So to read other people's stories, and to read them and just feel like, oh my God, it feels like I've written this. That is quite liberating in a sense, and you do have a feel of connection, as you say, and less isolation. I think being open and honest about it with someone that you feel comfortable. Like for me, it's my partner. Unfortunately, it's probably not something I can really talk with my mum about. But Andrew is, and it's scary. Like some of the stuff that I've had to share with him in the last couple of years were, I worried about his reaction,
Yeah.
to them, because they're not pleasant. They're not pleasant things.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you worry about them seeing you as that only. And what sort of impact will that have on you as, as a wife and as a, friend and lover and all those sorts of things, But getting over that fear and, just feeling like it's okay to be honest with how I'm feeling as much as I can, without worrying that, oh, I'm being too much for him, or, oh, it's,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm having a bad day, being able to say that. And if I can't say it, putting it in an email or something. It sounds silly, but sometimes I find it hard to actually vocalize it.
Yeah.
If someone asks me, oh, how are you going? So sometimes there are a couple of people that I know who I now, instead of maybe, talking too much about it when I see them in person, I'll write it down and send it to them. And I say, listen, you don't have to respond to this at all, because, there could be some stuff, might not feel like you know what to say, But it just helps me to know that you kind of know a bit about, or that someone knows a little bit about what's going on inside, which can feel really secretive and shameful perhaps. So that's been helpful. And I guess just trying to, how to put it, regulate my emotions more, like recognizing if I'm having a reaction to something that is maybe a bit disproportionate to what's actually occurring. So is it triggering something in me, this situation, that is making me go to 11?
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, this is not that bad a situation. It's kind of only like a 3 or a 4.
Yeah.
But there's something about it, either maybe personally to me, or because I'm having a rough period this week, or like in terms of like stress levels or whatever, that I'm like, my friend and I refer to it as a butter knife scenario. And the reason that we call it butter knife scenario is that I was notorious at a certain point in my life where I would just lose the plot if I couldn't open a packet of chips properly. Because I just get I don't know where this frustration would come at. Any package that I can't open, I basically just ended up grabbing this butter knife and stabbing the chips.
That's a beautiful picture.
Exactly. And I just thought, and I got so worked up physically
Mm-hmm.
Where, you would think that I was attacking a person or something. And not that I'd ever do that, but, it's just this. And I thought to myself afterwards, what have I just done to my body
Mm-hmm.
and to my mind over this packet of chips?
Yeah.
Girl, like get a freaking scissors and so I guess I've had reactions to things in the past and in the present that are like that, where they're just totally disproportionate to what is really happening. And then I'm putting myself through all this stress, my body, when I don't really need to be. And maybe just, if it starts, trying to recognize that that's what happened. Or if it does happen and I do have this outburst, to not chastise myself
Mm-hmm.
over it, to be like, to then, compound it by also being like, well, there's that garbage person again. She can't handle a packet of chips.
Yeah.
She's, how can I possibly live the rest of my life if I can't in a bag, So
Those are great. Those are great.
Yeah.
I like those a lot. And I love the one about, well, obviously having people in our lives. Well, the foundation is the ability and having the safe space to talk openly and be honest with people in your life. Certainly your partner. Like that's huge. And I feel that. And then I loved the one about, because sometimes, like, I definitely have challenges sort of putting into words audibly what I'm going through and what I wanted to relay, because again, these are complex things. So putting it into words in an email or something, and giving yourself the time to really explain it, really sort of relay to the person that you're writing to what you want them to understand about what you're going through. Like that's super powerful. And then the chips thing, oh my gosh, I so relate to that, because I've done this same exact thing. Not necessarily chips, but like if I put a lot on myself, and I like that. I like that I'm like, I can be capable and I can do stuff. But if I hit a snag, and the snag could be a fucking bag of chips, something like that, where I'm like trying to open something, I get rageful for sure. So I totally relate to that feeling. Yeah. Because it's
what
like,
am I really raging about? That's what the question.
What are we? But it's almost like, it's like I feel like, okay, I'm being overwhelmed in all these areas. Why is this fucking bag of chips putting me down?
Yes.
Like, why is that the thing that's making me crazy? Rageful. I don't know.
Why does everything have to be so difficult?
Yeah.
That's usually what will come out of my mouth, but far more swear words and stuff and Aussie slang. And then, of course, I'll probably eat the whole bag of chips.
Yes.
To try and soothe myself. Yeah. And then, feel terrible when my pajama pants are getting tight or something. But
I love and will always love, obviously this makes sense coming from someone who lives in Southern California, but tortilla chips and salsa are just something I can eat all day long forever. It's the best. What are your tortilla chips like in Australia? Do you do them? Do they have them?
We're not big. We're not big.
Is it more like potato chips over there?
Yeah, we're more like salt and vinegar potato chips and barbecue chips. So
it's more like a UK brand of chips.
Yeah, I think we do have some salsas, but they're kind of like just like, what would you say? Like standard brand.
Yeah.
Like Heinz or something. Like nothing too fancy or special. Yeah, we don't. I don't know. It's
we're
funny.
We're here in California with all of our stuff. Anyways, I guess what I want to talk about now, as we start to wrap up, is I was looking at some, I'm not diagnosed with PTSD. I feel, I was talking to actually my therapist last week about like this episode, Bernadette, and talking to you about PTSD, and I was asking her, like, do you think I have PTSD? Like, she doesn't think I have PTSD, but there's certainly, like, I certainly have traumas that affect me to this day, that sort of guide me in certain areas and affect me emotionally still. And I avoid and I repress and things like that. But as we start to close out, I went on a tangent there, I'm sorry. I was looking at a list of like some ways to cope with PTSD, and I thought I liked them, and a few of them are from our friend Bessel van der Kolk, our favorite buddy.
Yes.
One is EMDR, and I mentioned that at the top of the show. It's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. What I wrote here is people who have been through trauma can become insensible to themselves, trouble with feeling pleasure, engaging. EMDR has been shown to help awaken senses. And one of the things that struck me as I was learning and reading more about PTSD is the body, is the sense. And it's a thing we've talked about, is getting back in touch with our bodies and how external motivators, how thoughts, how these things affect our body and our senses. And so one of like the coping mechanisms of PTSD is to try to pay more attention to those things.
Yes.
And by that I mean maybe understand where they're coming from, how they're coming, and then even being in it and okay with it as it's happening.
Yes.
One is challenging our sense of helplessness and isolation. I know that I feel helpless and isolated when I am experiencing severe cases of depression. And one sort of simple way that has helped me feel a little bit less helpless and isolated is to just pop out and like go, because I work from home and I'm like with my dog all day, which is great, and I feel super privileged to be able to do that. But it also is super isolating for someone like me.
Yeah.
And so like what I found to be helpful is just to pop out to the coffee shop and work there for a couple of hours, and then come back after I get that sort of external energy and I feel a little less isolated and helpless. And you had mentioned, I don't remember what context, but with that challenging our sense of helplessness and isolation, one of the things that our friend Bessel van der Kolk recommended is reclaiming our sense of power by volunteering or reaching out to a friend or like joining a support group.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I found support groups quite helpful.
Yeah.
I've been to a few. And yeah, it is just that as you say, that sense of isolation can be really damaging, and it can fuel that avoidance cycle even more. And once you're in it, it's really hard to break out of that. And so, yeah, support groups, and even just, there are times when a support group's not going to work for me because I just can't leave the house. My anxiety is that high. So even just joining an online community, I have found can be helpful in sort of desperate times. To, even if you don't necessarily communicate on the forum, just to maybe have a read of what other people have said, to kind of feel a bit less alone, or even just, when worst comes to worst for me, if I can at least even just go and sit outside, and not be kind of, one of the things that I guess another thing that's quite common with people who have PTSD is that idea of tuning out, as you say, like not only from your body, but like everything. And so either using like alcohol or TV, I find I get really into, like, sometimes I'll just sit there and I become like a zombie. Yeah, well, I mean, Buster Bluth's kind of that's the better end of the scale. Like, at least I'm engaged least I'm like engaging and I might laugh. But other times it's just literally like staring at the
Yeah.
screen or
Yeah.
a screen for a period of time. And sometimes it's even it might even be like really terrible things I'm watching or things that will fuel my
Like what kinds of things?
tsunami footage, or
Oh
I like to
gosh.
look at tsunami footage or bad weather footage or,
Okay.
all this sort of anxiety provoking
Yeah. Yeah.
things, end of the world documentaries.
But there's something
And
almost like I think I'm finding like some relatability in that because there's something almost like watching that stuff. There's something almost freeing about it. It's like,
yeah.
hey, this is all going to go to shit. What do I have to worry about? Like there's almost like a sort of freeing aspect of that. While
Oh,
we find positive aspects of people's demise. That's terrible.
yeah. So it's God, it's not pleasant.
Um, you mentioned forums. Are there any particular that have helped you?
There's one on oh gosh, now I can't. I think there's a one on PTSD. I think it's called something like the something into the storm, I think.
Okay.
Into the storm. If you Google or if you Google complex PTSD in particular, if it's something to do with maybe developmental and child sort of abuse and neglect, long-term sort of things like that, I think it's into the storm or fade. Oh, I should have written them down. Sorry,
No, it's okay.
I
I'll
didn't think
find
to
them
do that.
and add some in the show notes.
But yeah, I'm pretty sure one of them is into the storm, and they had some really interesting just information, I guess, about different side effects and things like that, or, different symptoms and things like
Yeah.
that. Personal stories from people. And then, yeah, they also have forums and stuff that you can read and sort of contribute. And they're pretty well moderated, sorry.
Yeah.
Because obviously you don't want a situation that can be, people are kind of just being able to write whatever.
Sure.
Without any sort of order, just because there could be, instances where that makes people feel worse than when they first sort of started
Yeah.
looking at it.
Yeah. No, that's good to know.
Mm. There's an app called Stigma. Have you ever heard
No,
Stigma?
I don't think
Um,
so.
yeah, it's interesting. I've only just downloaded it a couple of weeks ago, and I'm not 100% sure if I'm using it effectively, but it's only for Apple iOS. So I've had to download it onto my iPad.
Okay.
But it's interesting because there's you can just type whatever you want and share it with everyone that's on there. And sometimes I'll just look at what other people have, and sometimes a lot of them are really positive, like people are saying good things, that they're having a good day, and then there are other ones where people have said they're not having a great day, this is happening, they're worried about this.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, there was just something about reading the different things that on a daily basis of what people are going through that I found quite reassuring in a sense, or at least that, and I've shared a couple of times, but, it was more just the sort of looking through and seeing the varied responses that people had.
Yeah. It's very powerful. That helps me for sure. And it's why I'm doing this podcast, but it's so helpful to
Yeah.
see that other people are maybe struggling, in the way that you're struggling,
Yeah.
Um, before we go, a couple more things. So you are a movie nerd.
Yes.
Do you feel like, have you, we don't have to get into this because mental health stigma was episode 1, but we can. Do you feel like there are representations of, decent representations of mental health, or PTSD specifically in film? And do you have any that come to mind, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know about PTSD in particular, besides perhaps films about people returning from
War.
Iraq or
Yeah.
Vietnam,
Yeah.
and some of those are really good and really important because let's not forget, even though um, a lot of research at the moment is relating to PTSD in those circumstances, there was a time when that was considered, oh, that's not true, or that's just people not being able to get a job or something.
Yeah.
There
It's
was a
terrible.
time when that itself wasn't recognized,
Right.
whereas now we've kind of reached a point where people at least have an awareness that no, this is very common, and we need to have support systems for people who return from war or from serving in even in humanitarian roles in war torn and poverty stricken areas.
Yeah.
So I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I
No
think there
worries.
are some good mental health uh, representations. I think the issue, and this applies across representation everywhere, I think, is that nothing is ever going to represent everyone with a certain diagnosis. Do
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I
Like,
do.
um, or no film is going, if you're someone who's LGBTQI, no film is ever going to be be able to represent every
Yeah.
aspect of that. I think as long as it's coming from a place of truth, and has a good intention to it, it's not trying to misrepresent
Mm-hmm.
or
Have some sort of political
be harm
motivation or
yeah, or be harmful in the way
mm-hmm.
that it represents. Obviously there's, a lot of talk about, mental illness and violence at the moment, and people who, could be violent because of mental illness or so I find those sometimes the way that is represented in film quite troubling, because most people who have a mental illness aren't violent at all, except maybe to themselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's an interesting film that had a lot of people were very iffy about. Did you ever see Welcome to Me with Kristen Wiig?
I didn't. I wanted to. I
Yeah,
love her,
yeah,
so was it
yeah. I
good?
actually found that really quite fascinating. I personally feel like I have quite a few borderline personality traits.
Mm-hmm.
And a few of my friends have a diagnosis of borderline, but she despised it. So it was quite fascinating to see that, I found an interesting portrayal, and yet someone who has that diagnosis really didn't like it. And yet I've also read other people who have the same diagnosis think that it was wonderful.
Yeah.
So I guess it's really about, having varied portrayals and being able to discuss, I guess, what meant something to you and maybe what you found troubling, and just recognizing that it's never going to speak to everything.
Yeah.
But we need more portrayals, I think, of actually Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, the TV show. I don't know if you've watched that. That's a really, really fascinating TV series about mental illness with songs. So yeah, I find, and she there was a lot of discussion about whether she would actually be diagnosed with something in the show, and she finally has sort of had a diagnosis, and there was a whole episode dedicated to her being diagnosed.
Oh, that's good.
And yeah, so I think
You
that show's
spoiled
really.
it for me. Thanks a lot.
Oh well, I haven't given you the diagnosis at least,
No,
but
it's
yeah,
okay.
it's
I love that show. I think she is
yeah.
brilliant, and I'm just behind. And
Mm,
um, no, that's good to hear. That's good. Yeah, we just need
mm,
more. I think you're right. I think more openness, more truth, and just more representations. And then we as the viewers, take what we want out of it,
yeah,
and
yeah, exactly.
as it pertains to our own stories.
Mm,
So before we go, a thing that I've been doing on this show is highlighting maybe an empathy hero in our lives.
mm-hmm,
So in previous episodes, I've mentioned I've quoted E. E. Cummings, and
mm,
or I've mentioned just people I know personally that are doing good work in terms of embracing empathy and kindness and compassion and mental health awareness.
mm,
Any or all of the above. So people in your life, whatever. I will go first to give you a sense.
mm-hmm,
My empathy hero this episode is my dog, Scooby.
mm-hmm,
I I know it sounds a little silly, but I am deeply connected to Scooby. He is just so sweet and kind and playful and lovable, and he always reminds me to be present. And when I'm feeling especially like anxious about an upcoming thing or anxious about something in the past that happened and I'm feeling depressed about it or whatever, a sort of it doesn't always happen, but what has helped me is to go back to Scooby and remind myself, hey, this dog's just living in the day, pooping and peeing and sometimes trying to eat other dogs' poop, but he's still a good dog and I love him deeply, so he's my empathy hero for this episode. How about you, Bernadette? Any empathy heroes you want to highlight?
Let me think. I guess in terms of someone that isn't, personally connected to me, someone whose writing I've often found really comforting, even though the topics aren't necessarily all that comforting, is Margaret Atwood.
Oh yeah.
Not obviously not necessarily even though the Handmaid's Tale is very empathetic in its portrayal of certain characters. It's quite a harsh book to read, but some of her earlier works where she looks at friendships between women and relationships between men and women, like Cat's Eye and Robber Bride, my personal favourite, Lady Oracle, which I've got my little tattoo of on my arm.
Nice.
There's just something about the way she writes that makes me feel heard, or a sense of understanding and just that general like understanding of human experience and the ability to empathize. But as for someone that's maybe a bit actually connected with me, I do have to probably give Andy another shout out, just because he again, I don't know everything about him. You can be married forever and never know everything about him, but what I do know is I don't think he necessarily had a lot of exposure to mental illness growing up, unlike myself, and comes from you relatively maybe more stock standard family than some. And so I think to embrace a partner that has these challenges and to open yourself to learning about something like that and trying to help someone you love is actually really a beautiful thing. And, maybe I need to reflect more on that and less about the burden aspect, as we were talking about earlier. So, yeah,
that's beautiful. Okay. I love that. And yay, Andy.
Yeah.
Good job, Andy.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that. So I guess the last thing is to, for you, Bernadette, if you want to point anyone toward any projects you're working on or your podcast or just, if places where they can connect with you.
I guess the podcast that Andrew and I do, we don't necessarily talk about, although I do tend to raise my mental health quite often when I'm talking about films, but that's the AB Film Review, and we're on Twitter and Facebook, so you can just look us up there. And the kind of the work that I'm doing is pretty insular in Perth at the moment, but I think I would just really encourage anyone out there to just share something with. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. And it might not always work. Maybe you'll be vulnerable to someone who doesn't have the skills or isn't quite sure how to respond, and that might not be the best experience. But despite regardless of the outcome, even if we always want it to be positive, having the strength to share something that is still not necessarily that understood in the world and still has stigma surrounding it is a really brave act, and it's an act that hopefully will alert people to the fact that we really do need to be more open and kind just in general with our fellow man. I think that's something that we're really lacking as a society. We're all just disconnected in certain ways, and perhaps, focused on the future and about what can I buy and fill my sadness or my emptiness with, rather than actually just reaching out to those that are in our lives, or just reaching out to someone, on a screen, if it's not someone that, if you don't have people in your life that you feel comfortable sharing things with. So yeah, that's just try it.
I love it. I love that a lot. And thanks for sharing that. And thank you for sharing your story. I mean,
No, thank
you. It's important to me, and yeah. Anyways, thanks for being here. And
it was good.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll
I enjoyed
say,
it.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. The last thing I say, and this is a thing I've been saying at the end of every show, and I'm wondering when I'm going to stop that little preface to this last thing I say. I'm here, you're here, we're here together on this wayward, overwhelming, awe-inspiring pale blue dot. We have each other. It's you, me, empathy.